Education is not a privilege and every child should benefit from it. Like all children, children with disabilities have ambitions and dreams for their future. Like all children, they need quality education to develop their skills and realize their full potential. Disability is one of the most serious barriers to education across the globe. There is a need for inclusive education and curriculum in all schools, but progress comes slowly, and inclusive systems require changes at all levels of society. That is what our conversation hopes to address and understand today as part of Samarth by Hyundai, a movement for equal rights for people with disabilities. Let me introduce our panel. We have with us Mary Barua, Director, Action for Autism, a mother who has dedicated her life to improving the lives of people with autism in India. Radhika Alkazi, founder and managing trustee Astha, a community-based organization that works in the urban slums. Manika Sharma, director the Shri Ram Schools, a school that practiced and embraced inclusion since they started. And we have with us Ashwini Angadi, founder and trustee Ashwini Angadi Trust and Belaku Academy. Ashwini has won many awards for making education accessible for blind students. Thank you all so much for joining us. To begin with, Mary, I would like to start with you. You started teaching from home, with Neeraj, your son, and another student, and then now with Center for Autism. Take us through your journey. How much has changed over the years, and what are the existing barriers to inclusive, integrated education?
Well, there has been a lot of change since I started. And the reason why I started was because there were not that many services for autistic children at that time. And the services that were there did not really understand the needs of somebody who was a different kind of learner. So since then, of course, there has been a lot of changes. I would say one of the major things that has changed is that while inclusive education is not really happening the way we would want to see it happen, schools are making an effort, and there is an effort to get children into mainstream schools, whether they be government schools or private schools. A lot still needs to be done. We have, I would say, in a 1,000-yard journey, we are probably on the 100th yard.
Okay, so
but
long
I
way
think
to
it's
go.
good to have made that start, considering where we were, because when I started, there was very, very little understanding of disability, or the understanding that anybody with any kind of disability could at least learn. So that awareness was not there.
Shift has happened, but a long way to go.
Yes.
Radhika, you've been a member of the drafting committee of the national policy, on children. Can you tell us about the national inclusive policy? What all does it have?
So the national education policy came in 2020, and as it was being drafted, many comments were sought, and many members of the disability sector gave their opinions. So it was quite vibrant at that time. And we were very happy when the policy actually came, that some of the things it says, for example, the national education policy says that the 2016 Act will be looked at in absolute totality as far as the right to education of children with disabilities is concerned. And this Act talks about inclusive education. For the first time, we have a definition of inclusive education. For the first time, we also have detailed work on points on actually what are the things we need to do. Because as Mary said just now, the how is really the problem. And this law gives us a lot of the how. And the national policy accepts it unconditionally. That is what the policy says.
So, Manika, now there is a framework, there is a policy in place, like talking about the how with what we started the conversation. Schools say we are inclusive, and we are talking about inclusive education. We say we have the measures. How difficult is it to make a bathroom door, have a wider door so that a wheelchair can go in, or ramps in school?
It's a great question. So at the Shri Ram School, we are 35 years old now, going into 36th year. This was something that our founder, Mrs. Manju Bharatram, was very clear right from the very start, that this is something that we need to embrace. And now I think most schools are aware that they need to embrace this and actually have adaptive measures. So when it comes to curriculum, since you asked a specific question, we have special educators, and then we see the needs of the children, and then we try to adapt to where they are in that journey, in that learning curve. All right, suddenly they will not go into business studies or computer sciences or everything. First, we need to make sure that socially they are accepted in school, that they get all the love, the nurturing, the hand-holding. Most importantly, we need to make sure that the community, the school community, embraces this very closely. So let me give you an example. At the Sri Ram school, we have a member on the PTA who represents all the children and all the parents who come with different needs. We also have a member on the student council, because you have to walk the talk. So if our student council has one rep student who is voted by the children, then the students in the assembly also see that, okay, here is a school that recognizes and appreciates, and that we can also take charge and take responsibility. Besides that, infrastructural changes, for me, that's a no-brainer. I think from toilets to ramps to accessibility to opportunities for children to training for teachers, all become very much a part of our school's DNA.
I think which are very, very important. And now we are going to be talking about also government schools and, how in urban slums, the work I think, Radhika, you're doing, talking about private schools as well as government schools. Ashwini, you studied in Shri Ramana Maharishi Academy for the Blind till grade 10th.
Yes.
Right? And then your life changed once you went to a mainstream college.
Correct.
You faced many challenges, once you were in the mainstream campus. And today you're working on creating more inclusive, education, inclusive schools and communities. Tell us about inclusive curriculums. What really is it all about?
Correct. See, our trust is mainly for an inclusive education where we have both visually impaired and non-visually impaired students study together, play together, fight together, eat together, and they are not sympathetic on the each others. They are empathetic. So our curriculum is quite similar, but the study materials are different. See, for instance, like even the non-visually impaired child also study history, and the visually impaired child also study history. But the non-visually impaired student make tactile map for visually impaired kid in our school. That's how the inclusiveness is going to start, as these panelists told. So the inclusiveness starts from the beginning, and that's how we have arranged the curriculum. And the other thing is, our visually impaired student is going to teach our non-visually impaired student music. So like this that we have done, and we have creative science modules for visually impaired students, and that are trained and done by our non-visually impaired students. Like, see, when I was in childhood days, during my childhood days, I used to just by heart the things like the kidney is a temporary storage, like it stores urine and everything. So now we are making in our school that everything has to be touched and understand the things and learn the things. It's not, mug up and by heart the things. I am so proud, I am so happy that my non-visually impaired students are not sympathetic towards visually impaired students. Hey, you go and drink water for yourself. I will not help you. I will just tell you the direction. That's what these are the words the non-visually impaired students tell to visually impaired student. Initial days, our teachers and other staffs used to help visually impaired students, but our non-visually impaired made visually impaired students so independent.
Mary, you have dedicated your life to studying, teaching, as well as creating awareness about children with special needs. Specifically, I want to ask you, as an educator for over 30 years, we do know there's a lack of trained educators in our country. How important is it, how the role of psychology as well as trained teachers?
See, the role of psychology is important, of course, because teaching is in any case based on psychology, right? But I think what you really need are teachers who are trained, I would say more attitudinal training than anything else. I think that's the really crux of it, because you often have teachers who are trained maybe in teaching students who are blind or teaching students who have autism or a learning disability. And given the situation in our country, that's the one teacher who has to teach everybody. And very often, while they have learned to teach children with one condition or another condition, the attitudinal change has not often been addressed. And that really is the crux of the whole thing. So, we may not always have teachers who are able to teach all kinds of disabilities, but if you have a teacher who's sensitive, who tries to understand a different learning style, and who will, like Ashwini just said about a school, teach in ways that are experiential.
Yes.
Because when you do experiential teaching, you are not only teaching the child the learner who's blind, you're teaching the learner who's autistic, you're teaching the learner who has dyslexia, you're teaching the typically developing learner as well, right? So, helping children to think, teaching them in an experiential manner, those are the things that are really, really important, because we all realize that given our country of, 1 billion plus and the number of learners with disabilities there will not be in the coming years enough teachers for every kind
child.
of specific disability to teach in mainstream schools. So we need teachers who have that sensitivity to teach.
Radhika, clearly there is a need for an individualized approach rather than a one-size-fits-all approach. That's what we've been talking. You work with slum children, with disabilities. What are the specific needs that are required, and how can we bring inclusivity here?
When we started about 30 years ago, we used to struggle to get 4 to 5 kids into school, into the government schools. Today, I'll say in our organization, we know about 40, 50 kids are going into school at the right age. Earlier, children with disabilities would go into schools when they were much older, because they would come out much older, but although this change has happened, there are still many, many barriers that haven't changed. For example, getting to school. The child who is even in a wheelchair, how do they get through those narrow lanes, and how do they get to school? So getting to school is a big, big barrier, and we need for the government to make transport available for children to get to schools. That's one.
Okay.
The other thing is, very often there are no caretakers in schools, in government schools. So mothers are having to still sit in the schools with their children. They are having to feed the child. They take the child to the toilet. When the midday meal is given, it is the mother who has to take the child and see. Now that becomes very, very difficult for most parents in the urban slums, because they're also working, there are other children to take care of, and that's another big issue. The third issue is really what hasn't changed is, how does this child study and study well? Reasonable accommodation, the little changes that you need, all those things are still lacking, even though the children, many more are in schools just now.
I think very, very important points. On that note, we're going to be taking a very short break. How can schools be made more inclusive, the role of parenting, and a lot more when we come back. So stay tuned. Welcome back. You're watching a special show, Samarth by Hyundai, and we're talking about inclusive education. Manika, according to the RT, which is the Right to Education Act, every school needs to have specific teachers for the children learning with disability. But very often we hear that forget about the number of teachers which they should be having, children are denied admission. Very often they're not invited for birthday parties. In fact, they're never invited for birthday parties, picnics, playgrounds, public spaces. They face this challenge. How can we bring about sensitization, awareness among peers in creating acceptance, empathy and understanding?
Orientations that we have for parents, all right, where we spell out very clearly that, look, this is who we are and this is where you belong, and now you're a part of this community. When we have student assemblies, we just make sure that all children get equal opportunities. So be it annual functions, be it student assemblies, be it sports day. they're recognized, they're awarded. And we have lots of events in school which are centered around the children. So, just for skill development, we have an annual event which is called Shri Saksham, all right, where we invite students from all over Delhi and NCR who come, who display what they have made, little things made of cane baskets or Christmas cards and things like that, where recognition happens. As far as the parents go, I think parents are very well aware, and again we spell it out in our induction and orientation that all children have to be invited for birthday parties. So it's a very sensitive approach,
Yes.
and it's we come with empathy that that empathetic quotient is very high in every educator in the Shri Ram school. Even in schools, private schools like ours, I think all of us need to say that, okay, we are here for our children. And
Absolutely.
And if any parent is watching this, they would know that we know what they do and we want our child there. And you can't close admissions to children who are
Absolutely.
differently
You're not
able.
supposed to.
You're not supposed to, So even at our school reception, whilst we have the regular receptionist, we also have at every campus 3 ladies who are visually impaired, who are helping the other children. And similarly, we have hired our own children who have come back to us, and we've hired them in roles in school as teacher assistants, as lab assistants, in the library. So all the children, the community watches.
Ashwini, we've spoken about the role of teachers, we've spoken about curriculum. Talking about parents, they play a very, very important role.
Yes.
Could you highlight the challenges that a parent faces when it comes to inclusive education?
The first and foremost challenges that they face is, see, usually in my trust, the children are from rural background families and poor background families, and even parents, they don't even have their education. So their lacking is the guidance. They are misguided many times. Means they tell, no, don't send to inclusive school, because they'll just come and sit. They'll just go to school and sit, and they have food. If they're in government school and they'll come back, you put them in a special school, they'll be very good. So they are misguided like that. The other thing is, they have lack of awareness about inclusive education, and first of all, they are not educated, and how will they know about inclusive education? So these are the 2 things, and lack of network between each other parents. See, they'll have, we have both kind of parents. Parents who are educated and they put their child in inclusive education. Parent of a child with disability who are not educated, but they don't have, they don't want to put them in a inclusive school. So these are the first thing is lack of awareness,
Sure.
lack of guidance, and the lack of network.
So I think those are very important points: lack of awareness, lack of guidance. Well, that is a parent's challenge. Mary, I want to ask you something. Another challenge with educators, special educators face is parents, living in denial that their child has special needs. How does a parent realize or understand that their child needs, has special needs?
See, I know that very often parents, when they first find out that their child has any kind of a disabling condition, it's very hard for most parents, I would say 99% of the parents, to accept that. And that's not surprising, because to be honest, in our society, if we find out that somebody has a disability, how do we treat them? I mean, if we are very, very honest, supposing if today my brother came and said, I want to marry a girl who is a wheelchair user, how many families would happily say, oh, how lovely,
Yeah.
We'll welcome the girl in. Or my daughter wants to marry an autistic young man, right? So, we live in a society where disability continues to be stigmatized, whether we like it or not. Yes. That's a fact, right? And we work with very grassroots people, so we know the kind of stigmatization that is there. And the parents come from that background. For them, their relatives are saying, acha, kya hai iska? So they don't want to acknowledge it. Their neighbors are saying, right? So people around you are constantly stigmatizing disability, so it's hard for them. So they want them to go into a regular school, so there is that aura of regularness. Sometimes even if they know the child is not learning anything, they'd rather the kid go to a regular school, because they can say, mera bachcha school ja raha hai, class 3 mein ja raha hai. That is what we need to change. We want them to want to go to send their child to a regular school so that the child will learn.
Yeah. Not just for society or to...
Yeah, but that is what happens.
So the acceptance, I think, is which you said is
the
a core
acceptance
problem.
and I
because of
think-
the stigma.
And when parents are having difficulty accepting, I think we have to be very understanding and say, you know, I understand that you're having a difficulty, but you know what, if you do this, it'll help your child.
Yeah.
So that's really what we need to move towards.
Absolutely. I think, again, a very important point. Radhika, reframing inclusive education as a shared responsibility. How do we all play a role as a community? What role can we all play?
You know, they say it takes a village to bring up a child. Yeah. So it is everybody's responsibility. It is not just the parents' responsibility. At present, we tend to put a whole lot of responsibility on the parent and that family to navigate all the systems, which is very tough. Communities, groups play a very, very important part in, you know, when I say acceptance, I mean, I really want to say this: disability is part of human diversity. So it's not, it's something that everybody if we're talking education, the whole ecosystem, right from the administrator of a school to all the other parents, to the children, to the community that is all around, there has to be an understanding. And I won't use the word acceptance, because acceptance really means that somebody else is accepting. That's not what the child or the parent needs, because it is a right.
Yes, it is.
For the child to be educated in our country.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining us. We need to ensure that children with disabilities have equal access to inclusive, quality education, because more than anything, it is their fundamental right and has a direct impact on the progress of a nation and its economy. Thanks so much for watching Samarth by Hyundai, a movement for inclusivity, diversity and accessibility.